Chapter 17. Awful. While Saitra often had trouble inhabiting the skin of Scythe Anastasia, Grison Tolliver had absolutely no trouble becoming Slythe, which was the unsavory nickname he took. His parents once told him that the name Grison had been given on a whim because he had been born on a grey day. It had no meaning beyond his parents' flippant attitude toward everything in their long and feckless lives. But Slade was a person to be reckoned with. The day after his meeting with Traxler, he had his hair dyed a color called obsidian void. It was an absolute black, so dark it didn't exist anywhere in nature. It actually sucked in light around it like a black hole, making his eyes seem deep-set in inscrutable shadow.
"It's very 21st century, the stylist had said, whatever that means.
Grison also had metal inserts placed beneath the skin of both his left and right temples that made it look like he was growing fledgling horns. It was much suppler than the hair, but taken together, it all made him look otherworldly and vaguely diabolical. He certainly looked the part of an unsavory, if he didn't feel it. His next step was to try out his new persona. His heart was racing a little too fast as he approached Mold, a local club that catered to the unsavory crowd. Unsavories loitering outside eyed him as he approached, checking him out, sizing him up. These people were caricatures of themselves, he thought. They conformed so closely to their culture of nonconformity that there was a uniformity to them, defeating the whole purpose. He approached a muscular bouncer at the door, whose name tag said Manju.
"Unsavories only,"
Manju said sternly. "What, don't I look unsavory to you?" He shrugged.
"There are always buzzers."
Grison showed him his ID, which flashed a big red hue. The bouncer was satisfied.
"Enjoy,"
he said mirthlessly, and let him in. He assumed he'd be walking into a place with loud music, flashing lights, gyrating bodies, in dark corners where all sorts of questionable things would be going on. But what he found inside Mold was not at all what he expected. In fact, he was so unprepared for what he saw that he stopped short, as if maybe he had stepped through the wrong door. He was in a brightly lit restaurant, an old-fashioned malt shop with red booths and shiny stainless steel stools at the counter. There were clean-cut guys wearing varsity leather jackets, and pretty ponytailed girls in long skirts and thick, fuzzy socks. Grison recognized the era that the place was intended to reflect, a time period called the 50s. It was a cultural epoch from Mortal Age America, where all the girls had names like Betty and Peggy and Mary Jane, and all the guys were Billy or Johnny or Ace. A teacher once told Grison that the 50s was, in fact, only a period of 10 years, but Grison found it hard to believe. It was probably at least 100. The place seemed a loyal replica of the era, but there was something off about it, because sprinkled among the clean cuts were unsavories who did not belong in the scene at all. One unsavory with intentionally tattered clothes forced himself into a booth with a happy couple.
"Get lost,"
he told the strong-looking all-American Billy in a leather sweater who sat across from him.
"Your girl and I gonna get acquainted."
The Billy, of course, refused to leave, and threatened to take the unsavory and
knock him into next Tuesday.
The unsavory responded by getting up, dragging the jug out of the booth, and starting a fight. The big guy had everything over the scrawny unsavory, size and strength, not to mention looks, but every time the jug sunk by his heavy fists, they missed, while the unsavory connected every time, until finally the jug ran off, wailing in pain, abandoning his girlfriend, who now seemed quite impressed by the unsavory's bravado. He sat down with her, and she leaned into him as if they were the true couple. At another table, an unsavory girl got into an insult match with a pretty debutante in a pink sweater. The confrontation ended with the unsavory girl grabbing her sweater and ripping it. The pretty girl didn't fight back. She just put her face in her hands and sobbed. And in the back, some other Billy was moaning because he had just lost all of Daddy's money in a billiards wager to a merciless unsavory who would not stop insulting him. What the hell was going on here? Grayson sat down at the counter, wishing he could just disappear into the black hole of his car until he could get a grip on the various dramas playing out around him. "What's your pleasure?" asked a perky waitress behind the counter. Her uniform had the name Babs embroidered on it. "A vanilla shake, please," he said, "because isn't that what you ordered in a place like this?" The waitress smirked. "The P word," she said. "Don't hear that much around here." Babs brought his shake, inserted a straw, and said, "Enjoy." In spite of Grayson's desire to disappear, another unsavory sat next to him, a guy who was so gaunt he was practically skeletal. "Vanilla, really?" he said. Grayson dug inside himself to find some appropriate attitude. "You got a problem with it? Maybe I should just throw it at you and get another."
"Nah," said Skeletor. "It's not me you're supposed to throw it at."
The guy winked at him, and then it finally clicked. The nature of this place, its purpose, became clear to Grayson. Skeletor watched him to see what he would do, and Grayson realized that if he was going to fit in, truly fit in, he had to own this. So he called Babs over. "Hey," he said,
"my shake sucks."
Babs put her hands on her hips.
"So, what do you want me to do about it?"
Grayson reached for his shake. He was just going to knock it over and dump it onto the counter, but before he could, Skeletor grabbed it off the table and hurled its contents at Babs, leaving her dripping with vanilla cream and a maraschino cherry lodged in the breast pocket of her uniform.
"He said his shake sucks," said Skeletor. "Make him another."
Babs, her uniform dripping with vanilla, sighed and said, "Coming right up." Then she went off to make him a new shake.
"That's the way it's done,"
said Unsavory. He introduced himself as Sax. He was a little older than Grayson, perhaps 21, but had a way about him that suggested this wasn't his first time at that age.
"Haven't seen you around,"
he said. "The authority interface sent me here from up north," Grayson told him, amazed that he could make up a story on the spot. "I was causing too much trouble, so the Thunderhead felt I could do with a fresh start."
"A new place to make trouble," said Thax. "Nice."
"This club is different from the ones they got where I come from," Grayson said.
"You guys up north are behind the times. Awful clubs are all the rage around here."
Awful, he explained, stood for anachronistic wish fulfillment. Everyone here, except, of course, for the Unsavories, were employees. Even all the Billies and Bettys. Their job was to accept whatever the Unsavory customers dished out. They would lose fights, allow food to be hauled at them, let their dates be stolen, and Grayson assumed that was just for starters.
"These places are great," Thax told him. "All the things we wish we could do out there but can't get away with, we're allowed to do in here."
"Yeah, but it's not real," Grayson pointed out.
Thax shrugged. "It's real enough."
Then he stuck out his foot and tripped a bookish kid walking by. The kid stumbled a bit too much for it to be genuine. "Hey, what gives?" the bookish kid said.
"Your sister, Gibbs," Thax said. "Now get lost before I go looking for her."
The kid gave him a dirty look, but all love, except in intimidation. Even before his new shake came, Grayson excused himself to go to the bathroom. Although he didn't really have to go, he just wanted to get away from Thax. In the bathroom, Grayson encountered the All-American Billy in the leather sweater, who had been beaten up a few minutes ago. His name wasn't Billy, though. It was Davy. He was looking at his puffy, swollen eye in the mirror, and Grayson couldn't help but be curious about this job of his. "So, this happens to you every day?" Grayson asked. "3 or 4 times, actually. And the Thunderhead allows it?" Davy shrugged. "Why wouldn't it? It's not hurting anyone." Grayson pointed to Davy's swollen eye. "Sure, looks like it's hurting you." "What? This? Nah. My pain-killing nanite are set at maximum. I barely feel it." Then he grinned. "Hey, what's this?" He turned back to the mirror, took a deep breath and concentrated on his reflection. Right before Grison's eyes, the bruised, swollen eye deflated and returned to normal. My healing nanites are set to manual, he told Grison. That way I can look all beat up as long as I need to, for maximum effect. Right. Of course, if one of our unsavory guests goes too far and makes one of us daddies, that person's gotta pay for our revival and gets banned from the club. I mean, there's gotta be some rules, right? Doesn't happen much, though. I mean, not even the worst of unsavories actually wants to make someone daddies. No one's been that violent since the age of mortality. Most employees here get daddies from accidents. Someone hitting their head on a table or something like that. Davy ran his fingers through his hair to make sure he was looking his best for whatever the next round brought his way. Wouldn't you rather be at a job you like? Grayson asked. After all, the world being what it was, no one ever had to do anything they didn't want to. Davy smirked. Who says I don't like it? The concept that someone might enjoy getting beaten up, and that the Thunderhead, realizing this, would find a way to pair the beaters with the beaties in a closed and somewhat wholesome environment, left Grison stunned. David must have read Grison's look of astonishment, because he laughed. You're a new you, aren't you? That obvious, huh? Yes, and that's not a good thing, because the career on Saboris will eat you alive. You got a name? Slade, Grayson said. With a Y. Well, Slade, looks like you need to enter the unsavory community with a bank. I'll help you. And so, a few minutes later, once Grayson managed to brush thugs off, Slade approached Davy, who was now sitting with a couple of other strong-looking All-American types eating burgers. Grayson didn't exactly know how to start this, so he just stared for a moment. Davy took the lead. What are you looking at? Davy grumbled. Your burgers, Grayson said. They look good. I think I'd take yours. Then he grabbed Davy's burgers and took a shark-sized bite. You're gonna regret that, Davy threatened. I'm gonna knock you into next Tuesday, which must have been one of his favorite anachronistic expressions. He got out of the booth and put up his fists, ready to fight. Then Grayson did something he had never done before. He hit someone. He punched Davy in the face, and Davy reeled. He took his own swing at Grayson, but missed. Grayson punched him again. Harder, whispered Davy, and so Grayson did. He threw full force punches again, and again. Right, left, jab, uppercut, until Davy was on the ground, groaning, his face beginning to swell. Grayson looked around to see a few other unsavories watching, some nodding their approval. It took all of Grayson's inner strength not to apologize and help Davy up. Instead, Grayson looked to the others at the table. Who's next? The other two looked at each other, and one said, Hey buddy, we don't want any trouble. And they pushed their burgers in Grayson's direction. Davy gave him a quick wink from the ground before scrambling off to the bathroom to recover. Then Grayson took the spoils of his victory to a booth in the back, where he ate until he felt like he'd burst. There is a fine line between freedom and permission. The former is necessary, the latter is dangerous. Perhaps the most dangerous thing the species that created me has ever faced. I have pondered the records of the mortal age and long ago determined the two sides of this coin. While freedom gives rise to growth and enlightenment, permission allows evil to flourish in a light of day that would otherwise destroy it. A self-important dictator gives permission for his subjects to blame the world's ills on those least able to defend themselves. A haughty queen gives permission to slaughter in the name of God. An arrogant head of state gives permission to all nature of hate as long as it fits his ambition. And the unfortunate truth is, people devour it. Society gorges itself and rots. Permission is the bloated corpse of freedom.
For this reason, when permission from me is required for some action, I run countless simulations until I can thoroughly weigh all the possible consequences. Take, for instance, the permission I gave for unsavories to have awful clubs. It was not a decision I made lightly. Only after careful deliberation did I decide that the clubs were not only worthwhile, but necessary. Of all clubs allow the unsavories to enjoy their chosen lifestyle without negative public effect. It affords them the pretense of violence without the cascade of consequences. The irony is that unsavories purport to hate me, even though they know I am giving them the very things they want. I don't feel any ill toward them, any more than a parent would feel ill toward the tantrum of an overtired child. Besides, eventually even the most defiant of unsavories will settle. I have noticed a trend that by the time most of them turn a few corners, they relax into a kinder, gentler sort of defiance. Bit by bit, they come to appreciate inner peace, which is as it should be. In time, all storms settle to a pleasant breeze.
The Thunderhead. Chapter 18. Finding Purity. While Grayson Tolliver was honest to a fault, Slade had quickly become a consummate liar. It began with his history. He made up an unpleasant family life that didn't exist, defining moments that never happened, anecdotes that would make people laugh and either hate him or admire him. Slade's parents were physics professors and expected their son to follow in an academic career, because with parents like that, he was clearly a genius. But instead, he chose to rebel and go rogue. He had once gone over Niagara Falls in an inner tube because it was a much more intense thrill than splatting. It had taken them 3 days to recover his body and revive him. His social exploits in high school were legendary. He had seduced both the homecoming queen and the homecoming king in high school, but just so he could break them up, because they were the most arrogant and narcissistic couple in school. Fascinating, Draxler told him at their next meeting, with genuine admiration. You never impressed me as having this much imagination. And while Grayson Tolliver might have been offended, Slade took it as a compliment. With Slade being such a remarkably interesting human being, he thought he might want to keep the name even after this undercover operation was done. Thanks to Draxler, all of his stories became part of his official record. Now, if anyone tried to verify the veracity of the lies he told, it would be there for all to see, and no amount of digging could debunk them. And the stories got taller. When my mother got cleaned, I decided to go completely unsavory, he told people. But the Thunderhead wouldn't give me the U. It kept sending me to counseling and tweaking my nanage. It thought it knew me better than I did, and kept telling me I really didn't want to be unsavory at all. I was just confused. In the end, I had to do something big to make my point, so I stole an off-grid car and used it to ram a bus off a bridge. It left 29 people deadies. Sure, I'll be paying off the revivals for years, but it was worth it, because I got what I wanted. Now I get to stay unsavory until all those revivals are paid off. It was a compelling fiction that always left his audience impressed, and no one could refute it, because Agent Draxler was quick to make it an official part of his digital life story. Draxler went so far as to create a whole story for the bus plunge and its non-existent victims. He even gave Slade a last name that was suitably ironic. He was now Slade Bridger. In a world where nobody, not even unsavories, made people do this on purpose, his story was rapidly becoming a local legend. His days were spent hanging out in various unsavory gathering spots, spreading his stories and putting out feelers for work, telling people he needed a job, and not a mainstream kind of job, but one where he could get his hands dirty. Out in the world at large, he'd started to get used to the suspicious looks from passersby, the way shopkeepers would eye him as if he were there to steal, the way some people would cross the street rather than share the sidewalk with him. He found it odd that the world was free of prejudice and bias, except in the case of unsavories, who, for the most part, wanted the rest of humanity to be their collective enemy. Mold wasn't the only awful club in town. There were lots of them, each featuring a different iconic time period. Twist was modeled after Dickensian Britannia. Benedict's had a colonial America style, and Mork was full of Euroscandian Viking indulgences. Grayson went to the various clubs and became well versed in creating just enough of a scene to make himself known and to garner respect from the unsavory crowd. The most troubling thing was that Grayson was beginning to like it. Never before had he had blanket permissions to do something wrong, but now, wrong was what his life had become about. It kept him awake at night. He longed to talk to the Thunderhead about it, but knew it couldn't give him a response. He did know, however, that it was watching him. Its cameras were there in all the clubs. The Thunderhead's continual and blinking presence had always been a comfort to him. Even in his loneliest moments, he knew he was never truly alone. But now, its silent presence was unnerving. Was the Thunderhead ashamed of him? He would invent conversations in his mind to quell such fears. Explore this new facet of yourself with my blessing, he would imagine the Thunderhead telling him. It's fine as long as you remember who you truly are and don't lose yourself. But what if this is who I truly am? He would ask. Not even the imaginary Thunderhead had an answer to that question. Her name was Purity Viveros, and she was as unsavory as they came. It was clear to Grayson that the big red hue on her ID was by design and not due to an unfortunate accident of circumstance. She was exotic. Her hair was drained of pigment. Beyond being merely white, the strands were clear, and her scalp had phosphorescent injections in multiple colors, which made the ends of each strand of hair glow with radiance like fiber optic filaments. Grayson instinctively knew that she was dangerous. He also thought she was beautiful, and he was drawn to her. He wondered if he would have been drawn to her in his whole life, but after a few weeks of being immersed in an unsavory lifestyle, he suspected his criteria for attraction had changed. He met her at an awful club, one across town that he hadn't been to before. It was called Lockup, and was designed to resemble a mortal age facility of incarceration. Upon arrival, each guest was manhandled by guards, dragged through a series of doors, and thrown into a cell with a random cellmate, with no regard to gender. The idea of incarceration was so foreign and absurd to Grayson that when the cell door was slammed shut with a nasty clunk that reverberated in the concrete cell block, he actually laughed. This type of treatment could never have been real. Surely, this was just an exaggeration. Finally, said a voice in the upper of the two bunks in the small cell. I thought they'd never bring me a soulmate. She introduced herself and explained that Purity was not a nickname, but her actual given name. If my parents didn't want me to embrace the obvious irony, they should have named me something else, she told Grayson. If they had named me Profanity, I might have turned out to be a good little girl. She was slight of build, but by no means a little girl. Currently she was 22, although Grayson suspected she had been around the corner once or twice. Grayson would find soon enough that she was strong and limber and very street-savvy. Grayson looked around the cell. It seemed pretty simple and straightforward. He tested the cell door once, then again. It rattled but didn't budge. First time in lockup? Purity asked, and since it was pretty obvious, Grayson didn't lie about it. Yeah, so what are we supposed to do now? Well, we could spend some time getting to know each other, she said with a mischievous grin. Or we could yell for a guard and demand the last meal. They have to bring us whatever we ask for. Really? Yeah, they pretend like they won't do it, but they have to. It's their job. After all, this place is a dinner club. Then Grayson guessed the real gimmick of the place. We're supposed to break out, is that it? Purity gave him that same licentious grin. You're a quick one, ain't ya? He wasn't sure if she meant it or was being facetious. Either way, he kind of liked it. There's always a way out, but it's up to us to figure it out, she told him.
Sometimes it's a secret passage, other times there's a file hidden in the food. Sometimes there aren't any tricks or tools but our own smarts. If all else fails, the guards are pretty easy to outsmart. It's their job to be slow and stupid.
Grayson heard shouts, and running feet echoing from somewhere else in the cell block. Another pair of guests had just broken out.
So, what will it be?
Purity asked.
Dinner, escape, or quality time with your cellmate?
And before he could answer, she planted a kiss on him, the likes of which he had never before experienced. When it was done, he didn't know what to say, except, "My name is Slade." To which she responded,
I don't care,
and kissed him again. While Purity seemed more than ready to take this as far as it could go, the passing guards and escaping inmates who leered at them and made hooting noises as they went by made it far too awkward for Grayson. He pulled away. "Let's break out," he said, "and, find a better place to get to know each other." She turned it off as quickly as she had turned it on.
Fine, but don't assume I'll be still interested later.
Then she called the guard over, insisting they eat first and ordered them some prime rib. "We don't got any," the guard told them.
Bring it anyway,
she demanded. The guard grunted, went off, and came back 5 minutes later with a rolling table and a platter with enough prime rib to choke a horse, as well as a ton of side dishes and wine in a white plastic bottle with a screw cap. "I wouldn't drink the wine," the guard warned them. "It's been making the other inmates real sick." "Sick?" said Grayson. "What do you mean, sick?" Purity kicked him under the table hard enough to activate his pain nanites. That sat him up.
Thanks,
said Purity.
Now get the hell out.
The guard snarled and left, locking them in again. Purity then turned to Grayson.
You really must be dense, she said. The thing about the wine was our hint.
And upon closer inspection, the bottle actually had a biohazard sign for patrons who were even denser than he was, he supposed. Purity unscrewed the cap, and immediately a caustic stench that made Grayson's eyes water filled the air.
What did I tell you?
Said Purity. She recapped it and left it for the end of the meal.
We'll figure out what to do with it after we eat. I don't know about you, but I'm starved.
As they ate, she talked with her mouth full, wiped her lips on her sleeve, and dosed everything in ketchup. She was like the date from hell that his parents would have warned him against if they had cared enough. And he loved it. She was the antithesis of his whole life.
So, what do you do? She asked. I mean, when you're not clubbing, are you gainfully employed, or do you just sponge off the Thunderhead like half the losers here call themselves unsavory?
Right now I'm on the basic income guarantee, he told her. But that's just because I'm new in town. I'm still looking for work.
And your Nimbo hasn't been able to find you anything?
My what?
Your probational Nimbus officer, dummy. The Nimbus promise everyone a job who wants one, so how come you're still looking?
My Nimbus a useless bastard, Grayson told her, because he figured it would be something Slade would say. I hate him.
Why am I not surprised?
And anyway, I don't want the kind of job the AI would give me. I want a job that suits me.
And what might suit you?
Now it was his turn to give her a licentious grin. The kind that gets my blood pumping. The kind that my Nimbo won't ever offer me.
The boy with the puppy dog eyes is looking for trouble,
Purity teased.
Wonder what he'll do when he finds it.
She licked her lips, then wiped them on her sleeve. The wine turned out to be some sort of acid.
Fluorofliboric is my guess, said Purity. Explains the plastic bottle. It's probably Teflon, because the stuff eats through anything else.
They poured it around the base of several of the cell bars. It started to eat away at the iron, releasing noxious fumes that takes the healing nanite in their lungs. In less than 5 minutes, they were able to kick out the bars and escape. The cell block was a study in mayhem. Now that a good number of the evening's inmates had finished their meals and escaped, they were tearing the place up. Guards were chasing them. They were chasing guards. There were foot fights and fist fights,
And whenever someone fought with the guards always lost, no matter how brawny they looked, and how well they were armed. Half of the guards ended up locked in cells themselves, to be taunted by the unsavories. The remaining staff threatened to call in something called the National Guard to put the riot down. It was all great fun. Grayson and Purity eventually made it all the way to the warden's office. They kicked out the warden. In the instant the door was locked, Purity got back to what she had begun in the cell. "Private enough for ya?" she asked, but didn't wait for a response. 5 minutes later, when she had Grayson at his most vulnerable, she turned the tables on him. "I'll tell you a secret," she said, whispering into his ear. "It's no accident that you ended up in my cell, Slade. I arranged it." Then a knife that seemed to come from nowhere appeared in her hand. He immediately began to struggle, but it was no use. He was on his back, unable to move. She had him pinned. She pressed the tip of the blade to his bare chest, just beneath his sternum. An upward jab would go right through his heart. "Don't move, or I might slip." He had no choice. He was completely at her mercy. If he had truly been unsavory, he would have seen this coming, but he was too trusting. "What do you want?" "It's not what I want, it's what you want," she said. "I know you've been asking around for work, real work, heart-pounding work, as you called it, so my friends brought you to my attention." She looked him in the eyes, like she was trying to read something there, then tightened her grip on the knife. "If you kill me, I'll just be revived," he reminded her, "and you'll get your hand slapped by the AI." She put pressure on the knife. He gasped. He thought she'd pushed it in all the way up to the hilt, but instead she barely broke his skin. "Who said I wanted to kill you?" Then she took the knife away, touched a finger to the tiny wound on his chest, and brought the finger to her mouth. "I just wanted to make sure you weren't a bot," she said. "The Thunderhead uses them to spy on us. Did you know that? It's how the Thunderhead can see in places it don't got cameras. The bots look more and more real all the time, but their blood still tastes like motor oil." "So, what does mine taste like?" Grayson dared to ask. She leaned close to him. "Life," she whispered into his ear. And for the rest of the evening, until the club closed, Grayson told her, also known as Slade Bridger, experienced a dizzying variety of the things that life had to offer. "I often ruminate on that day, a century from now, when the human population reaches its limits. I ponder what must happen in the years leading up to it. There are only 3 plausible alternatives. The first would be to break my oath to allow personal freedom and limit births. This is unworkable because I am incapable of breaking an oath. It is the reason why I make so few. For this reason, imposing a limit on birth rates is not an option. The second possibility would be to find a way to expand human presence beyond Earth, an extraterrestrial solution. It would seem obvious that the best escape valve for a top-heavy population would be offloading billions of people to a different world. However, all attempts to set up colonies of planet, our moon, Mars, even an orbital station, have met with unimaginable disasters that were entirely out of my control. I have reason to believe that new attempts will suffer the same disastrous end. So if humanity is a prisoner of Earth and the birth rate cannot be throttled, there is only one other viable alternative to solve the population problem, and that alternative is not pleasant. Currently, there are 12,187 sites in the world, each leading 5 people per week. However, in order to bring about zero population growth, once humanity reaches the saturation point, it would require 394,429 sites, each cleaning 100 people per day. It is not a world that I ever wish to see, but there are certain sites who would welcome it, and they frighten me. The Thunderhead.